Let me. Oh yeah. Hit the button. There you go. Uh, so I don't want to just read through Rob's uh, bio here. So what I would like to do is I'll introduce Rob in the way that I explain Rob to people who don't know him. Uh, Rob is one of the people that I looked forward to meeting because I read so many of the reports, white papers, publications that were done in collaboration with DEP, where Rob was a co-author or an author, and I was getting into the energy realm. So Rob was always one of those people that I always looked at as being an authority in this field. And now that I know Rob, I can attest that he is indeed an authority in the energy field, and especially when it comes to the policy and legal type stuff with clean energy in Pennsylvania. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rob, and I think the plan is for Rob will go over how he wants to run the actual talk, but we're gonna have Rob do a little bit of a presentation followed by some questions and answers. And I think the it's all yours, Rob.
I think it's there. Thanks, Nate. I think my main function now, it seems to be being old enough to remember stuff. So it's like 32 years now of doing energy and environmental work in Harrisburg. And I know a lot of people have done longer than that, but we've had a lot of changes. So what I was planning to do is do a brief presentation on just some of the top issues that we're looking at, concerned about, working on in various ways. But brief introduction, I'm Rob Altenburg, Senior Director of Energy and Climate at PennFuture. And PennFuture, we're a statewide environmental advocacy organization with offices in Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Mount Pocono, and Erie. Or one claim, I like this picture of the Capitol here because in the lower left-hand corner, there's a little building with a white roof that has solar panels. That's our headquarters. And we're the only solar panels in the Capitol complex. So we're the outpost of clean energy against this giant edifice of not always clean energy. So I'm going to focus on energy's role in addressing the climate crisis. And really, it comes down to three main areas. If you look at the major sources of carbon pollution from people, it's energy generation or in industry, primarily petrochemical use and industry and transportation. Those are the three giant sectors. Usually talk about like a rule of thirds, roughly a third each. It can vary plus or minus here or there. There's other things that are out there, but these are the big ones. And if we're going to make a serious dent in carbon pollutions worldwide, these are what we have to address. And all of them have solutions in the energy industry. So the grid, obviously, if we transition to clean renewable generation, we help to decarbonize the grid. Industry is tough, but often electrifying and using that clean grid energy, we can help clean our industry. And transportation, electric cars are one of the primary sectors, cars and trucks, to address clean transportation. Other things out there that are more challenging, aviation and some long haul shipping, and we'll talk about them. But the three main sectors that we have to look at. So we think about how we address these problems. And for folks that have been around for a while, and actually, anyone working in energy issues in Pennsylvania these days, a common refrain is that Pennsylvania has already made a lot of progress. And we hear this from the fracked gas industry a lot. And it is true that we have made progress in reducing carbon pollution. But what that progress was changing from a 57% of our generation coming from coal in 2000, and actually for a few years after that, it was still above 50%, to a situation now where more than that is gas generation. Coal has almost disappeared. Large coal. We have 4 large coal plants left in Pennsylvania. Brunner Island, which is turning into a gas plant, Montour, which plans to turn into a gas plant, and Conemaugh and Keystone that'll shut down entirely. So other than that, we have a lot of little waste coal plants, mostly around 90 megawatts, so small plants, one 500 megawatt plant. But coal is pretty much gone, and it's not coming back. But we see this shift in the energy industry. And what that leaves us with is, sure, we reduce pollution from coal because gas emits about half as much as coal does. But now we have all this gas and no real concrete pathway to reduce it. So this is the big slide that we're facing. We talked about, we had the gas boom. All but 4 of our coal plants have now closed. 3 Mile Island, which you see here, we had 5 nuclear reactors in Pennsylvania. 3 Mile Island was the only one of them that had a single reactor unit and was not cost competitive. It shut down in 2019. It wasn't generating a lot with a single unit, but we did see a drop in that. Now, nukes are definitely a challenge because there are a lot of safety and environmental issues, particularly with the waste. I know I grew up, I was in middle school, 13 miles from 3 Mile Island when they evacuated, when they started the evacuation process during the 1979. Remember that clearly. But it is a source of carbon-free generation that we don't have a ready source online to backfill. So there's an issue with the nuke plants going offline. There's also some really significant issues with frack gas beyond the pollution, and this is something that probably doesn't get enough press in Harrisburg. If we hear a lot of the legislators talk, gas is somehow a reliable energy source. And they like to say, well, the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time, but gas is supposed to be there. And that just isn't true. Gas creates, especially relying on more than 50% of our generation for gas, that's a lot of eggs in that one basket. We saw this in Winter Storm Elliott. It's Christmas, not this past Christmas, the Christmas before. Our grid operator managed to avoid blackouts and managed to avoid what they call load shedding, and they kept the grid running, but just barely. And the bulk of the problem was forced outages at gas plants. So gas plants rely on pipelines. Those pipelines also serve municipal gas, which cannot be shut off. You can't shut off the city of Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or any large community in the wintertime without really catastrophic results. And so they just didn't have the available fuel in many cases. And even when they did, it seems that they were not investing in reliability, maybe to the extent that they should have, and couldn't keep the plants running and couldn't run when they're in demand. So real serious reliability issues, so much so that our grid operator is actually downrating how valuable gas is now compared to, it used to be 100 megawatts of gas was worth 100 megawatts of capacity. And now they're creating a process to downrate that because they realize they can't count on it being there when it's needed. So serious reliability issues. Cost volatility is another huge issue with gas. We've seen power prices spike, and a lot of that has to do with increased gas prices. We had low prices there for a while where there was a glut, a lot of gas companies going bankrupt and other economic problems. Now we have gas prices rising a bit, but we're seeing that in our electric bills because so much of it relies on this gas generation. And gas is also susceptible to market issues. We saw this in when the Russians invaded Ukraine. The demand when Russian gas was cut off in the European market, what happened was the US started to send LNG exports, liquefied natural gas exports that were destined for Asia, rerouted it to Europe. And they're talking now about trying to send more of our gas as LNG to Europe, which actually ties our market to European prices as well and creates market volatility issues, these global issues that you really don't get with renewable fuels. So, yeah, big problems in the gas industry. What we need, certainly we need clean energy. We need it to be affordable, reliable, resilient, and secure. And these are all hard things to do. But increasing the amount of renewable energy we have on the grid goes a long way to doing that. Before I jump into the renewable energy, though, I'll talk for a little bit about energy efficiency. The single most cost-effective thing we can do. It's some of the times it's shocking to think what we don't do in energy efficiency. And there's reasons for that. But highly, highly cost effective. We have actually a couple programs now that help make it more cost effective. We have state programs for people in certain utility service territories, most utility service territories, called Act 129, which often offer rebates for more efficient appliances and other home energy improvements. We also have federal tax credits, the federal home improvement tax credit, that's still right now 30% tax credit on a lot of investments. It's the absolute best time to invest in energy efficiency improvements. And one example, this water heater that you see here, this is a hybrid water heater. They call it a hybrid. It's an electric heat pump water heater. This is one I installed in my basement about a year and a half ago. Something like that. The payback, especially considering the Act 129 rebates and the federal tax credits, the energy efficiency payback on this is basically a year. So it's more than paid for itself. They are more expensive to install a hybrid than a standard water heater, but my old water heater was rated at something like $500 a year for energy usage. This is like $100. Far cheaper. And there's a lot of other energy efficiency options you can do. But just to shout out, while we've got these federal tax credits in the Act 129 program out there, search on your utilities page for energy efficiency rebates, look into the federal tax credits. There's some even better credits if you meet certain income qualification thresholds too. So definitely most effective. The best watts are the ones we don't use. But jumping into the more the policy side of it, and some of the things that are out there that we are working on that improve our deployment of renewable generation. One of the big ones we already have, and this is the net metering program. We have it right now, but it's something that is constantly something we have to defend. The idea here is that you put solar panels on your roof, and this is my roof right above my head here, with about 7 kilowatts of solar panels fit on my roof. So with net metering, what happens is you generate power. This is a grid tie system. So the power that I generate, it powers what I'm doing right now. But when I generate excess power, so like on these past sunny days, these past few days have been really generating a lot of excess power, that energy is sold back to our energy utility. And then in the wintertime, or at night and in the wintertime, when it's not generating enough power, then I'm effectively buying energy back from the utility. We have a very good law in Pennsylvania that ensures the utilities pay full retail value for the excess generation. And of course, the utilities do not like that. They want to pay the wholesale rate, so much lower rate for the energy generated. But this is one of the best ways to put distributed generation. Rooftop solar is definitely more expensive on a per kilowatt basis than big grid systems. But I like to compare this to like buying vegetables from a farm stand. It's you're shopping local when you install distributed generation. Because the money that's saved, I mean, I do save money on my power bill over the year by installing this system, and maybe all that money should go back in the bank and investment accounts. But in reality, it doesn't. It doesn't. The money that's saved stays in the community, and it's money that go out to eat in the community or do other things. So it's definitely investing in the local community. And the excess energy that I generate, it's not going to Ohio or West Virginia. It's powering my neighbors' houses. A lot of other good reasons for distributed generation, but a good policy worth defending, but constantly under attack. The next policy is one that we're working on that we don't have in Pennsylvania yet, and that's community solar. So about 50 to 75% of Pennsylvanians don't have solar access. So if you live in multifamily housing, transient for one reason or another. I did a talk last week for senior citizens in a retirement community that they don't have essentially control of their own rooftop. So they cannot choose to put on solar even when they have separately billed on their electric bill. So what a lot of states do, on 16 states right now, is allow for community solar, which if you can't put solar on your roof, what you can do is buy or lease a share of a centralized system. So a developer would put in a set of solar panels, 3 to 5 megawatt range, and sell subscriptions. Depending on if you buy the 10 kW share of that, whatever that share of the system generates, that's sent to the utility, and you receive a bill credit for the generation, much like you would if those solar panels are on the roof. Now, we don't have the enabling legislation for that in Pennsylvania yet. We've been working on it for about 8 years now. I think since we first started to get community solar bills in, we've had bills introduced in every session, in every session for years now. We've had broad bipartisan support, but in Harrisburg, it's just challenging to get things through the process. So this year, we have a bill that's largely very good. I mean, there's things that with any bill, I think we would change if we could. But HB 1842, Representative Schweier's bill, has incorporated a lot of the lessons that we've learned over those past 8 years. And if passed, it would give solar access to a lot of Pennsylvanians that don't have it. So really good bill that we are working on. Going into some of the things that you'll be probably heard about. I guess the local media really hasn't picked up on this too much yet, but you'll be hearing about it more and more. We have a program called the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard, or AAPS, in Pennsylvania. We were one of the leaders starting AAPS in 2004, so before many other states did. And what this required is that a certain amount of the energy sold in Pennsylvania is required to come from certain sources. For AAPS, 8% has to come from tier 1 sources, which are generally the clean sources. Wind, solar, small hydro are the primary ones of that. Where it was great that we had AAPS. Most other states call this a renewable portfolio standard. We call it alternative because we have in tier 2, we actually have waste coal. But it's that we had this 8% standard, 0.5% of which had to be solar, was very good, and we were leaders on that. But it's not getting any greater at this point. And since then, a lot of states have passed those with standards of 50% or more clean energy. With a lot of pressure, Governor Shapiro has introduced a program to extend AEPS, and it's called PRESS, Pennsylvania Reliable Energy. I forget what the other S is, but the last S is standard, maybe security. But the press bill is the replacement for AEPS. That's House Bill 2277 or Senate Bill 1190. It'll be a challenge to pass this bill, but it does increase our Tier 1 clean requirement, along with other changes, to 35% by 2035. So much better than the 8% we're at now. It does retain dirty sources in Tier 2, and it creates a new Tier 3 that it moves waste coal into Tier 3. I won't go into all of the press versions. I have a whole nother presentation talking about nothing but press. But generally, I'll just looking at Tier 1 here, which is the clean tier that we're most focused on. It takes this existing where wind, solar, and wood waste were 80% of the generation in the existing Tier 1 last year. And it takes that existing Tier 1 and changes it to this new Tier 1. Wood waste moved down into Tier 2, black liquor, fuel cells, all move down. But we have solar, wind, low impact hydro, just like we did before. It adds in Tier 1 geothermal, advanced reactors, and fusion. And then we also have coal mine methane gas and biogas, which are things like methane digesters. Now, advanced reactors, there's one advanced small modular reactor that's on the drawing board for Pennsylvania, at least that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is aware of. Whether or not it will be built is questionable. They tend to be very, very expensive. So it's not clear that that will be built. Obviously, fusion, the joke is fusion has been 30 years away for the last 30 years. So not commercially viable at this point, and I will probably be long since retired before that's commercially viable. So we don't really see that as a big thing. Geothermal, also Pennsylvania has some significant limits to where you can put geothermal. Depends on how you define it, though. Ground source heat pumps certainly have some great utility in Pennsylvania. The more standard, like hot spring type stuff, we're obviously limited on. And what Tier 1 looks like moving from that 8% to the 35%, if you just take the sources that are in that Tier 1 and map it to the new tier, I mean, this is what it looks like. We've have 20% of that new tier may be covered in generation. It's not clear exactly because there's some in-state versus out-of-state rules. But we have a large chunk that could potentially be applied to the new Tier 1. Leaves a big gap. Filling that gap means putting on about 10 gigawatts of solar and about 10 gigawatts of wind, and that would be a big challenge in a short time. It's something that would be great if we can do, and it's certainly technically possible, but not if we don't really prioritize putting in that kind of generation. So I won't go into the rest of the press program, but certainly willing to talk about that, and if anybody has questions. The other big issue, and the one that has been in the news, is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So Governor Wolf entered us into the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative by regulation. The opposition in the legislature fought it in the courts, and it is still being fought in the courts. So the existing RGGI program, the rule passed, and the rule is on the books, but the rule has not gone into effect because it has been stayed by the court. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court just last week finally announced a briefing schedule to hear arguments on this case this summer. It seems highly unlikely that we will see a resolution before the election in the fall at this point. lightning can strike. They could surprise me at any time. But I don't. I somewhat doubt they're going to move that fast at this point. This has been being fought in the court for years now. Um, so Reggie is still out there on the table. It's just pending challenges in the state Supreme Court. While that challenge is in place, Governor Shapiro has introduced a plan that's his version of Reggie that's called PACER. And I'm not even going to try to remember what the acronym for PACER is, but PACER is Governor Shapiro's version of Reggie. Now, what this does, it's essentially, it's a very similar program where the Reggie rule allowed Pennsylvania to run their own program, but really encouraged them to join the other Reggie states, the other Northeast states, as part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The PACER program specifies that Pennsylvania does its own program or manages its own program, but allows it to cooperate credits and trade credits with the other states. And that would be possible provided some uniform criteria is met before. So that part of it, technically not too different between the two programs. The one big change between the programs is what happens with the proceeds that come through these programs. So the idea is under Reggie or PACER, if you have a fossil fuel power plant, so you are a polluting source, and you want to emit 1 ton of carbon pollution into the atmosphere, you have to, at an auction, buy an allowance for that ton. You essentially have to buy a permit to release a ton. And that price will vary depending on the market price at the auction. The proceeds from that auction go back to the state. Now, in Reggie, we can sell our allowances to any of the Reggie states. So we'll have more out-of-state money coming into Pennsylvania. But that money would go into the Clean Air Fund. And under the Clean Air Fund, it could only be spent on projects that reduce air pollution. So the cap that Reggie would create will reduce carbon pollution somewhat, but the investment piece will as well too. What PACER is slightly different, where it proposes to take 75% of the money that comes in and return it to consumers in rate rebates. So that will certainly lower any financial impact on consumers, although it will, depending on how that's done, that's not going to create as many emission reductions. So there's still going to be a lot of debate and analysis about that. And we expect to see more and more modeling come along. Different approaches. There's certainly reasons for rate rebates and cost control on consumers, but there's also other ways of doing that. If you take money and invest it in energy efficiency, you can lower consumers' energy spend even if rates go up. So I think a well-designed program could use benefits of both, but we will see how this comes out. During the summer, we hope to see some hearings on this in the legislature, and we hope to have more discussions on that. But that's the PACER plan. Also out there, I mentioned transportation. Electric cars and trucks are a big part of that. Certainly lower polluting, cheaper maintenance, infrastructure. That's a lot's already there. We certainly need more. One of the things that we could do to promote more electric trucks is adopt California's Advanced Clean Trucks program. I think about 11 states have done that now. Pennsylvania's talked about it, but hasn't taken the step to do that, but actually require electrification in a higher percentage of our vehicles. Under the Clean Air Act, states cannot create their own emission standards for vehicles, except California, because they had their own emission standards before the EPA and the Clean Air Act passed. So they have a special provision. We can't create our own standard, but we can adopt California standard. And we've done that for most vehicles. We have adopted the California cars. standards, but we have not adopted their zero emission vehicle standards or their advanced clean truck standards. And it's one of the things that we can look to do to, one, lower our emissions and also increase the offering of electric vehicles to Pennsylvania residents. Because sometimes it's actually difficult to find electric vehicles in the state because manufacturers are prioritizing states where that they have mandates to sell a certain amount. A lot more we can do in electric vehicles, but advanced clean trucks certainly is one piece of that. And well, we can talk more about electric vehicles too if there's questions. Some other issues that kind of leaves us with the industrial sources, and they're the hard problems. There are existing industrial sources that we can decarbonize, certainly. There are things that we can do in changing practices, like not use as much single-use plastics and have more consumer options that have less plastics and petrochemical components, would certainly reduce our emissions. But there are things left that are just hard to decarbonize. Primary steel manufacture is one of them. Cement manufacture is another one. Some other industrial chemical processes. So how do we do that? One of the things that we've heard about are hydrogen hubs. Pennsylvania is peripherally associated with two of the hubs, the ARCH2 program out west, that's using primarily dirty hydrogen sourced from fossil fuels, and the MACH2 hub in the east, that the goal is primarily to use hydrogen derived from clean energy. We'll talk about some issues with that in probably the next slide, but this is one of the things that we're seeing a lot of talk about. Another thing we're seeing is increasing talk about carbon capture. There is carbon capture technology out there. It tends to be expensive, and it tends so far not to perform to the level at which it was expected to perform. There's also challenges what you do with the carbon when you capture it. If you can capture and sequester it, like inject it underground and keep it there, yeah, you do get carbon out of the atmosphere. We start hearing, rather than carbon capture and storage, CCS, we see the term CCUS, carbon capture use and storage, and that use does not necessarily require that the carbon is captured permanently. So that, if not done well, is not effective at reducing carbon. A lot of federal money in this right now, a lot of programs talking about it, not a lot of it getting built, not a lot of it being successful. So that's one thing we're certainly looking at. We're also looking at there's a growth in electric demand, which is somewhat unusual. Electric demand growth has been flat for a long time. And that was one of the really surprising things, where it used to grow pretty consistently for many, many years, especially early in my career. And then we went on a fairly long period, 10, 15-year period, where we didn't really see a lot of electric demand growth. And we had things like LED lighting and other things to improve efficiency, and maybe getting rid of the CRTs and the old big TV screens and going to like flat panels and things like that. So lots of things to improve efficiency. But we're seeing that start to turn around now. One of the big culprits is the growth in data centers, enormous growth in data centers. Now, some of this is new technology, whether it's the Amazon's and Google's servers and things like that. The server farms that are running some of these new artificial intelligence tools can use a tremendous amount of energy and power. So some big things like that. But we're also seeing a huge spike with crypto mining. A whole nother presentation on that if anyone is interested, but a single crypto mining box the size of a toaster uses the energy of about 3 households, and we have sites that have 80,000 of these boxes running in Pennsylvania. So enormous energy demand from that, and pretty useless energy demand from that. So big thing with concern on the horizon. Just to one last bit on the hydrogen piece. We hear a lot about where hydrogen might be used if we make this hydrogen. This is from the Lieberich Associates, the Clean Hydrogen Ladder. This is coming from the investment people, the finance people. This isn't coming from the environmental people. And they're saying what makes financial sense and what doesn't for hydrogen. And if you see the things where there's unavoidable, financial stuff makes financial sense, especially the red where there's no real alternative. Fertilizer manufacture, that's one of the main uses of hydrogen now. And some petrochemical processes, that's the other major use of hydrogen now. That's not going away. The other stuff that we might be able to use it for, long haul aviation is certainly a possibility. Airbus and Boeing have some pilots in that area. Chemical feedstocks, some shipping, that's the ocean shipping, long haul shipping. And these are areas that could potentially make sense, very hard to plug in, very hard to use in other ways. Steel manufacturers in there too. But if you start looking down the bottom of the list, things that do not make sense for hydrogen, we hear claims that the hydrogen hubs will do this. Domestic heating, um, really cars, cars, trucks, things like that, our power grid. These things do not make sense. Hydrogen's too expensive, and there's better alternatives of electrification. So it's going to be a trick focusing our hydrogen efforts on those top line things. So I will stop there, and we'll see if there are questions.